All right, good morning. We'll go ahead and get started. It's 11:01 this morning. Thanks for everyone who's joining us for today's in-service training. My name is John Diaz. I'm an assistant professor and extension specialist in the Department of Ag Ed and Communications, also affiliated with the Gulf Coast Research and Education Center. Today's presentation is going to focus on assessing needs and priorities in extension programming. So we'll go ahead and just jump on into it. So this slide goes over what will be covered in today's training. There are going to be a lot of different concepts that we'll cover, and we'll go over both the how and why in regards to situational assessment, including both the needs assessment process and the opportunity assessment process. I'm hoping that once you all finish this in-service training, you all be able to determine an effective approach for identifying needs of target audience for extension programs, develop strategies for prioritizing program, identify and utilize objective criteria for assessing the value of existing programs and activities, and use this process to help make data-driven decisions with help of stakeholders regarding whether programs and activities should be continued, changed, delegated, or eliminated. So first, this slide summarizes the key functions of a logic model that I know that all of us are very familiar with. There are four broad sections that we outline in the logic model. The situation we encounter that represents the problems, issues, or needs of our audience. The response of our program makes to address those problems, issues, or needs. The short-term, medium-term, and long-term results we expect the program to make, so outcomes and impacts. And the evidence that evaluation provides to indicate how well those results were achieved. So it's important that when developing program plans and priorities, we start with clearly understanding the situation. So where do we begin? To begin, we want to start with the end in mind, the results we hope to achieve. The program objectives identify what the program intends to accomplish. Because there are so many things that we can do and so many ways our program can respond to improving a situation, it's really important to set priorities. This is essential because there is a limit to available resources. So whether it's funding, staff, time, available volunteers, etc. So why develop a situational statement? It's important to develop a situational statement because you begin developing programmatic responses to problems, issues, or needs. So it gives you an understanding of the status of your county and potential subject matter needs of the clientele. It helps to guide and provide focus and determine your priorities because you can't do everything if you want to do anything really well. It's a requirement for your plan of work and report of accomplishments, but the benefit is that it helps to others understand the context of your efforts and your accomplishments. And these situational statements are really useful for grant proposals, award applications, providing perspectives for advisory group members and other stakeholders. So developing the situational statement is really important for your program. So what should a situational statement include? First, you want to start with the identification of a problem, issue, or need. Identify the target audience involved. Provide some background information about the problem and audience. Explain possible explanation of what has been done already and identify gaps needing to be served. Justification of why extension and therefore you can and should have addressed this problem, issue, need, and other partners who may be involved. It provides a succinct narrative using citations of credible sources. And one thing to take into consideration is does not include how the problem, issue, need will be addressed. That comes next. That's more speaking to program design and educational methods. So here I've provided an example of a situational statement. This is a situational statement for a Wisconsin extension program. It's somewhat on the lengthy side, but it still provides you with an understanding of what an effective situational statement would look like. I'm not going to go into it because you do have the PDFs of the different slides, but use this as a point of reference for developing your own situational statements. One thing that I would highly recommend reviewing is the situation statement guide. There are worksheets for writing situational statements and example situational statements. So again, this link is provided in the PDF of the slides that I provided for you, and I highly recommend using that framework for developing your situational statements so that you have all the different components that you need. All right, so I'm going to use this opportunity to try to test your knowledge in regards to what should be included in a situational statement. So on the next slide, we'll have 3 situational statements, and I want you all, if you could, in the chat, provide which ones or what response you feel like is appropriate situational statement. So I'll give you a few minutes if you want to read through the situational statements and what answer you feel like is appropriate for this section. All right, I'll give you all just about another minute. So Shuri, I'm asking you to look through the situational statements and identify which statements is the best, or if they're all examples of appropriate situational statements. All right, so this was somewhat of a trick question. So the answer is actually D. All of these serve as appropriate situational statements. These 3 situational statements were actually examples within the situational statement guide that I mentioned earlier. So you can see how there's slight differences within each of those, but these would all provide what would be an effective situational statement, because it answers all of the questions that we need to answer in regards to what the needs are and some statistical data in regards to what's going on. And don't these all have a plan sort of at the end, the last statement? So it doesn't exactly outline a plan. It just explains what behaviors or what the behavioral needs would be in regards to your program. So it doesn't necessarily explain what the workshop you're doing would be, but it is in fact a way to show what your workshop should be designed to do. I see a lot of times with agents that they put what their program does, so the workshops or the in-person consultations or whatever, within the situational statement, and that's actually more appropriate for the methods section and what instructional strategies you'll use. So we'll go ahead and plug on along, unless anyone has any questions. Do we have any questions before I move on? So we'll go ahead and plug on along. So ultimately, through the process of a needs assessment, we're seeking to be data-driven in program planning decision-making. This helps to determine audience needs and then the program direction. Accurate and complete information is key, although it's not always possible to have all the information we need to make good decisions. So it's really important that you have that understanding where there's an ideal situation and then that meets reality. So be realistic with yourself, but also be ambitious. And if you come up short of the ideal situation, it's quite all right. Oops. So this demonstrates how and where a needs assessment fits within program development. Needs assessment is part of what's a larger situational assessment and focuses on program outcomes. So if you look at the hierarchy of program outcomes, it's focused on the SEE conditions, practices, and CASA. Excuse me, someone's trying to call me. Opportunity assessment is also included in this process, and we'll get to what that is later on in this presentation. So according to Macaulay, needs assessment is a systematic approach to studying the state of knowledge, ability, interest, or attitude of a defined audience or group involving a particular subject matter. Needs assessments are used to learn about the important issues and problems faced by our public in order to design effective programs. So with that all said, why do we need a needs assessment? And there are a variety of reasons for conducting a needs assessment beyond what I had mentioned earlier. We need to know where we are before we can plan how to get there, so where we want to go. People should be involved in decisions that affect them, so it's a principle of democracy. Utilizing a needs assessment appeals to individual basis and needs and helps to serve as a measure of accountability. Through this process, you're also able to build program support, so it depends on how well we documented needs in the community. And it also gives us opportunity for the anticipation of conflicts. So through this process, we can find if there are any potential conflicts that exist within our communities. And then finally, needs change. As societies become more complex, people tend to depend more on others to meet their needs. So by incorporating needs assessment as a regular part of program development and design, it helps to make sure that you're in tune with those changes in society so that your program, in fact, meets those needs. So we talked about some of the potential benefits, but we'll go into that a little bit more. So programs that specifically targeted documented needs are inherently more effective and marketable, and that's important for everyone especially for ROA season. If it's in tune with those needs, that when we're measuring impacts, there's more of a likelihood that you'll realize those impacts. And a needs assessment also provides a method to learn what has already been done and what gaps in learning remain. This allows the educator to make informed decisions about needed investments, thereby extending the reach and impact of educational programming. So this gives you an opportunity to not recreate programs, but in fact supplement programs, find your niche, and make sure that you're able to complement what's already being done. So what does the needs assessment provide? It provides insights about how education and training can impact your audience, knowledge about educational approaches that may be most effective, awareness of existing programs and gap in available training to enable efficient use of resources, knowledge about the potential demand for future programs and products, and then the credibility that the program is serving to the target audience. So we spend a lot of time now going over the why of the needs assessment, and now we'll go ahead and dive into the how. So there's 7 components in a needs assessment plan. And a needs assessment is essentially set up similar to any research project or evaluation effort. So we start with writing our objectives, and these are learning objectives essentially. What do we want to learn throughout this process? We select the audience, so whose needs are you measuring and to whom will you give the required information? You'll do some preliminary data collection, and you'll decide where subsequent data collection will take place. So will you collect data directly or indirectly from the target audience? Once you've made that determination, you select the audience sample. So how will you select a sample of respondents who will represent your target audience? Finally, when you've made all those determinations, you develop an instrument that you can use to collect that data, and you begin data collection. So this is where you determine if a survey is most meaningful, focus groups, interviews, etc. So you are able to make that determination and collect your data from that sample. Finally, you analyze the data, and this is where you make sense and are able to parse out what those needs are in the different levels of the hierarchy. And then follow up, what will you do with the information that you gain in regards to creating your program, checking those needs within the target audience, and so on and so forth. So this is an opportunity to reconnect with those that you engaged in the needs assessment process and make sure that the needs that you were able to find across a composite of key stakeholders were truly representative of what the program should do. So basics your needs assessment should address are an estimate of the size of your market. Again, the needs, interests, constraints, and preferences of your target population. Basic information about potential competitors and collaborators so that you understand how you can market your program or how you can bring other folks in to collaborate with you if they're doing similar work. And then finally, recommendations for program development and design so that you're making sure that you're developing a program, again, that's in tune with the needs and to make sure that you're having the type of impact that you're looking for. So once you've determined all of your needs, it's impossible to develop a program that meets all of those needs. So you want to go through what's called a needs prioritization. And there's 4 steps in a basic needs prioritization. It starts off with understanding the significance of the social, ecological, and environment needs of the region. So how concerning is the need? And then the political will. So how much do community leaders, members care about this need or issue? Once you've parsed it out and prioritized it based on that criteria, you move to step 2, which is, well, how do these needs align with the vision, mission, and mandate of cooperative extension? Once you've come to a conclusion with that process and either reprioritized or kept things the way they are, then you look at how conducive the environment is in terms of potential participation of the target audience, partners, and collaborators. And then finally, you've had these sets of needs. What resources do you have to meet the needs? So it's great that you identify a need, but are you able to develop a program that can in fact meet those needs? And that's the last layer where you're able to then identify your priorities within your program. So we're going to go ahead and have another quick test of your knowledge. So we'll go ahead and start off with the needs assessment plan. So real quick, we'll just have you type in the chat, what is the first step in the needs assessment plan? Awesome. So you guys, I'll stop you guys there because it looks like you guys got it. It is C, write your objectives. So it's just as if you're doing a research project. You want to come up with your research objectives. And by developing those objectives first, then the rest of the steps will make more sense. You'll understand who your audience is and so on and so forth. So the first step is really, develop those objectives, and then everything else will come after that. All right, second one. This is the last one for this. So I want you guys to place the needs prioritization layers in the correct order. So if you just type in your chat what that order would look like. All right, well, we've gotten some good responses. The correct answer is CDBA. So as I mentioned, you want to know the significance of the need in the region in regards to the SEE. Then you want to see how it aligns with the mission of cooperative extension. Understand if there's a conducive environment, and then finally availability of needs. So I think most of you all were able to get that. Before we continue on, does anyone have any questions? All right, I'll take that as a no. We'll just go on further. Oh, and we do have a question, so I'll stop right there. How do we write objectives and then select audience? So when you're going to your program and you're a newer agent or you're a seasoned agent and you're going into another program area, you're first trying to figure out within your objective what it is you're trying to learn through the needs assessment process. And if you all are familiar with SMART objectives, part of the objective is identifying that audience within the objective. So you're essentially doing them at the same time, but there's not a really clear answer here, but you would essentially within that exercise be doing those simultaneously and move forward and selecting the audience more at a local level. So making those connections and understanding who the key stakeholders are. So does that make sense? Somewhat. So you're looking at your programming. So Sri, I know you're 4-H. So you're looking at what you want to learn in regards to how to develop an effective program within 4-H. And you're looking at within your objective the broader audience of youth. And then when you're doing or selecting your audience within Polk County, that's when you move to that next step, is identifying what key stakeholder groups within that county. And then once you develop that identification of those key stakeholder groups, then you develop the samples within those larger stakeholder groups. Okay. All right. Does anybody else have any questions on that? Arthur, I'm not understanding selective audience. I'm not understanding your question. Let me see if I can find you on this and unmute you. Give me 1 second. So Arthur, you want to explain your question? I've got you unmuted, I think. No, I don't. And it's not letting me unmute you. All right. Anyways, could you provide a little bit more clarification on your question, Arthur? Let's do this, Arthur. If you want to just email me afterwards, we can walk through that question so we don't hold up the whole group, if that works for you. So we'll go ahead and move on along. And so if you remember on an earlier slide, a situational statement includes both needs assessment and an opportunity assessment. So now we'll focus on the opportunity assessment part of the larger situational assessment paradigm. And if you see from this graphic, the opportunity assessment focuses on the bottom levels of program development and the left-hand side of your logic models. So looking at the different outputs, participation, activities, and inputs that you would need to make your program successful. So what an opportunity assessment really allows you to do is determine the target audience and their environment related to the regional need identified. And then at the reactional level, it allows you to understand the interests of the target audience, and it helps you determine how to solicit their participation in the program. This step will lead to decide best alternative strategies for getting them interested in the program. So this is really something that's important for marketing. Based on the opportunity assessment, needed participation of the target audience will be determined. So this will help you develop participation-related goals for your program through this process. It also helps you obviously identify programmatic actions and the resources that you need. So as we mentioned within the prioritization exercise, resources and resource availability is something that's important, and this opportunity assessment is how you would do it. So it's really looking at what's out there, what you can do and what you have available, and then making an informed decision on how you design your program accordingly. So as part of this whole process and doing the needs assessment, the opportunity assessment, and developing your program, an important consideration would be your program buy-in from key stakeholders. Buy-in can take many forms, including participation, funding allocation, support, etc. Research shows that if you include the stakeholders in program development, they are more likely to buy in. So really the way in which to do that is usually folks at a county level have an advisory committee. It's important means to not go out on a limb alone in decision making and to engage them in planning and just overall decision making in the program. These advisory committees can be standing advisory committees, long-term established groups, or short-term ad hoc groups through which you seek counsel and shared decision making. Some key advice includes an advisory group that can be formed to make initial recommendations for changes in your program or be more ongoing. The group can be composed of community leaders and constituents. So this means current and former participants, parents, and volunteers, staff from particular programs, etc. And then it helps to get a representative view by getting a mixture of people who are involved in the program. So those that know the program well, but also folks that are not familiar with the program. So you get a different variety of perceptions and perspectives to your program. And an effective advisory group is not merely a formality. So consider the industry puts big money into similar groups and they call them focus groups. So use this opportunity to really develop a meaningful group of advisors to make sure that you're in tune with all of the different stakeholder groups that your programs would help to address a need, and make sure that you're including them in an effective way. A lot of folks feel like focus groups are the only way to have an advisory committee engaged. But again, this meets the idea of the ideal situation versus reality. So really figure out a structure and a plan to include all your advisory committee members to have discussions based on need, programmatic input, and making changes to your program so they feel like they're part of your program, it's in tune with them, and then ultimately they're more bought in because they feel like they're part of the process. Got a question. So what is a good way to document the existence of advisory committee? Sometimes it's hard to have them in a formal meeting, especially in the case of busy farmers. So I think that's where you look at the evaluation technique that you will utilize to engage them. So if you can't necessarily get them all in a room to discuss, it's really making sure you go to them and work within their schedule. So that means maybe phone interviews, you do site visits where you discuss that with them, and then find maybe an event where they're all at. If you're a livestock agent and there's a livestock event that they're all going to be going to, attach a focus group to that so that you're working within their schedule, you're meeting them where they're at, and you have the opportunity to have that discussion. So it's really try to be strategic, see what works for your group, and provide a structured means of integrating their information needs and input into your program. So that wraps things up. I hope everyone found this to be a meaningful training program. If you have any questions after the fact, please feel free to email or give me a call on my office. But before we do that, is there any questions before we sign off today? So while folks are typing in questions, this training has been recorded. I'll be uploading it to YouTube. So if anyone wants to go through and have a refresher, that'll also be available. And I'll also be sending out a evaluation of this training. So please share your perspective on this training. I'm always trying to make sure that I'm able to provide meaningful training to you all. So let me know what worked and what did not work. So Katie, I sent that via PDEC. I sent a blast email. So if you didn't get that, I can just send that to you directly. And yes, I will share the YouTube link. So once I get that set up, I will just send an email through PDEC with that link. Okay, perfect. Yeah, Katie, if you can't find it, just let me know. All right. Well, thank you all. I hope everyone has a wonderful Wednesday. And please feel free to give me a shout anytime you guys need support. I'm here to support all the work that you all are doing through program development and evaluation. I want to make sure that you all feel that I'm a resource that's available. So anytime, please feel free to give me a shout, and I'd be more than happy to help you all. So Jenny, we have 3 FCS agents. Does there have to be an advisory board per agent? Not necessarily. I think that's a good opportunity for your FCS agents to work with the same advisory group. And I think by doing that, you also will help to develop more of a collaborative relationship among your FCS agents. So is recruitment something you do ISTs on? So are you talking about recruitment for advisory committees? Recruitment of participants. That's something that I can do an IST on. I don't have that set up this year, but if that's a need, I'd be more than happy to develop that. I'd probably work with Dr. Warner, who's currently on on maternity leave. She is the marketing expert within our department, but I can definitely work with her to provide something to help with that recruitment. So if you fill out the recommendation, if you could put that in there just to reinforce that need, I'd make sure that I follow up on it. Okay, can the 3 FC agents also have a shared volunteer group? Yeah, oh, most definitely. I don't think there's any hard, fast rule that they need to have their own volunteer group. I would say that it's really important to bring those FCS agents together to outline their expectations of how they share that group and what they would do to communicate with each other on when they're using volunteers at certain times. I think this is a way in which to mitigate conflict in the future. I think that while you're sharing those volunteers, you don't want to make sure that someone's not following that protocol and that it removes the availability of those volunteers for someone else. Yes, I can send you all. So the Zoom link is actually in the agenda, but I will, again, send a blast email to that whole group and just provide the link if you're not able to find it. Do we have any more questions before we jump off today? Awesome. Well, I'm glad you all enjoyed the training. We'll have another one tomorrow on developing measurable objectives. So if that's something that you're interested in, registration's still open. And then the second half of this series will focus on evaluation techniques. So if you want to brush up on best practices for surveys, direct observations, focus groups, those are also available. All right. Well, everyone have a good day.